of the four. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the fourth of our four-part webinar series on the topic of AmeriCorps grant writing. For today's topic will be budget nuts and bolts. And as always, we just want to start with building the learning environment. I know there was already a question in the chat around, is this class for writing grants with AmeriCorps or general grant writing? We are focusing on the AmeriCorps budget, but some of these tips can also carry over into other grant writing for sure. All right, so let's build that learning environment. Some of you have been on our other three sessions, and some of you, this may be your first time. So we just ask if you can share in the chat your name, your organization, and what's your comfort level with the AmeriCorps budget on a scale of 1 to 10. 1, know nothing about it, never really even seen it, to 10, I'm an expert on writing AmeriCorps budget. So just take a second in the chat to share your name, organization, and on a scale of 1 to 10, your comfort with the AmeriCorps budget. Thanks, Jennifer, for sharing. And Anna. Thanks, Richard. It's coming in, it's a wide range. We have everything from 1 up to 7, I think. Great. Thank y'all for sharing. All right, so hopefully after today's session, those of you who are on the lower end of the scale will be able to up your number 1 or 2 notches after today. And I believe I saw, Amy, your fixed amount grant. So some of this may not seem applicable, but it really is to you all too, if any of you are fixed amount grantees, because you always have to think about your budget as a whole and what's going to be going into your budget, even though you don't have to put a detailed budget into AmeriCorps. All right, so let's dive in. For today's agenda, we're going to talk about budget fundamentals, then we're going to talk about cost reimbursement budget, match, program income, and do a wrap up. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we're going to have specific times where I'll answer those questions. Or, you can raise your hand, or during question times, feel free to unmute yourself if it's just easier to ask your question out loud. We want to make sure that you get your questions addressed today, so please feel free. And all questions are on the table. Don't feel like you can't ask a question. Please ask those questions. All right, so we're going to talk about a few items in relation to the budget, and then we're going to go into a lot more detail about what an AmeriCorps budget entails. Some of these we talked about in our first webinar, but we wanted to reiterate them because these are important things to think about. So as I said, we discussed this one specifically on our first webinar, but the concepts are important, so we just want to review them. For the AmeriCorps grant, there's 2 main time periods. The first period of time is your budget year, which is a 12-month period of time. And to operate a program, it requires that you have funding for those full 12 months to help with staffing, program costs, etc. The second period of time is your program year, which consists of the time frame in which your AmeriCorps members serve their term. You have to design your program with your AmeriCorps members' terms of service that fall somewhere within your 12-month budget year. It's generally recommended that programs don't have members serve for a full 12 months because it does allow you time between cores to recruit the next core, evaluate the last program year, and prepare for the upcoming program year. It's also important to note that members cannot serve more than 12 months unless they were suspended during their service term. So having that shorter period of time gives a little bit more flexibility. The next concept is program budget versus grant budget. The program budget is the expenses necessary to run a high quality AmeriCorps program. Every anticipated expense you may have. But AmeriCorps programs are limited to the amount of federal dollars they can request, and there's no benefit for you as a program to overmatch on your grantee side of the budget, which is very likely, especially for new programs, that your grant budget will be a subset of your program budget. In your grant budget, you can include $0 line items, which we'll explain later in the webinar, to describe any additional items that are being provided to the program. Okay. And then before we jump into those budget nuances, we want to talk about some key terms. First is the member service year, often referred to as MSY. And in the business world, or like it's the equivalent time equivalent, or FTE. It's a basic equation where one MSY is equal to one full-time equivalent member. But each member service term has been assigned a title, a minimum hour requirement, and an MSY value by AmeriCorps. And so those are on your screen for you. Is my audio cutting in and out, you all? Sorry.
Yeah, it was there briefly. I usually just think it's my connection, but it sounds like it's happening for others as well.
Okay. Is it better now? Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay. If it continues, please let me know and I'll cut my video off. I'm not sure what the issue
doing
is,
it again,
but that might
Jennifer.
help. Okay. Sorry, y'all. Sorry about that, y'all. I'm going to go off camera and hope that helps for a little bit. So full-time members are one MSY, and they have to serve a minimum of 1,700 hours. Three-quarter time members, and this is where the math starts getting into government math, you would think would be 0.75, but it's actually 0.7 for 1,200 hours. Half-time, 0.5, 900, and then we get into these really long, complicated numbers. When we are calculating the MSY, you have to use the full number that AmeriCorps has designated. So for reduced halftime, you have to use 0.3809524, and they do 675 hours. And then it goes down from there. Quarter time, again, you would assume would be 0.25, but it's 0.26455,027, a mouthful there. For 450 hours, you have minimum time designated there for 300 hours, and our newest service term abbreviated time at 100 hours. Okay, this come in really important for you when you're calculating the amount of federal dollars that you can ask for in your grant. And Serve Washington expects applicants to apply for between 10 to 30 MSYs. You can have a waiver for the minimum or maximum if you would like to submit a waiver to go below the 10 or above the 30. Okay. In our second webinar, we looked at a blank copy of this document called the Benchmark Calculator, and this is a really great tool. I used it as a program director. I use it with all my clients, and it's a great tool to figure out the best term of service for your members based on the program operating hours, your service activities, and holidays. Okay, you can see here it's all filled out. Sorry, I'm still breaking up. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can shut some things down on my computer. Maybe my computer is just not happy with me today. See if this helps a little bit. Okay. Amy, just let me know if that's helping. Sorry about that, y'all. Okay. So you'll see this is filled out, and our full-time members are serving from September 11th to the end of July. The three-quarter time members are serving from September 11th until mid-May. Okay, this just helps you figure out, like I said, the minimum number of hours members have to serve on a weekly basis and what their service term looks like. So for full-time members, the expectation for this program is 40 hours a week. And then for three-quarter time members, it's 36 hours a week. It has 8 hours on Friday. That doesn't mean they have to serve 8 hours on Friday. It's just to keep it consistent throughout the benchmark calculator, which is a tool for you as program staff, not for the members necessarily. As I said earlier, I never recommend that programs have members serve for a full 12 months. One of those reasons is if you have members that are serving for 10, 11, or 11 and a half months, you have the option to extend their service if necessary. Here a few years ago, you all in Washington State are used to having snow, but here in Austin, Texas, where Amy and I, the city is not equipped for that. And we had what we called snow apocalypse, and the entire city shut down for a week due to extreme cold and icy conditions. So members missed a whole week of service, which is difficult to make up. So if the program was an 11-month program, that program had the option to extend that member service by a week with an amendment to the member service agreement to make up the time missed. Right. And again, it's important to have those breaks to think about what's worked well with your program and what you want to change and maybe finish up any recruiting. So this is an important piece when you're figuring out what kind of member terms that you want for your program. Is it better not to have full time and to have 3/4 time or half time? So this is a template that we've provided to you all with the second webinar resources, which is a great thing to utilize for your program. AmeriCorps, the federal agency by law, is still known as the Corporation for National Community Service, or CNCS. During COVID, they did a large rebranding effort and everything came under the name AmeriCorps. However, by law, since the agency is still known as the Corporation for National Community Service, or CNCS, you will still see this language in the RFGA and application instructions, mostly in the budget section. So for cost reimbursement budget, there are two columns, one marked CNCS share and one marked grantee share. You are requesting from the corporation for national and community service. The grantee share, or what we call the match funds, is the amount of matching funds, either cash or in kind, that you are providing. For the grantee share, CNCS has outlined what can be utilized as matching funds, and we will discuss that later in the webinar. And so for each of the line items within the sections and subsections we just discussed, you have to determine how much you are requesting from CNCS and how much you will provide in match dollars or in-kind resources. In your budget, regardless of what budget and program type, there is a maximum cost per MSY that you can request. The maximum cost per MSY is set each year by AmeriCorps for competitive programs, and an up to maximum cost per MSY for formula programs is set in the AmeriCorps NOFO too. Serve Washington then reviews the AmeriCorps Notice of Funding Opportunity and sets the maximum cost per MSY for their formula applicant. The cost per MSY outlined in the RFGA is a strict maximum, and if you submit a budget over the maximum, there's a chance that you will not be considered for funding. So the maximum cost per MSY for each grant type are as follows. Cost reimbursement for the 25-26 program year is $25,200. Full cost fixed amount is $25,200. Education award programs are $800 or $1,000, and professional cores are $1,000. Let's look at each of those. And most common is cost reimbursement. Sorry, Amy, were you going to say
I
something?
think you're fading out a lot. If
Is
you
this
want to
better?
stop, I'll take over.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone. We're going to switch gears and see if I'm better audio. You have to stop sharing. Sorry, I know you were not on this slide, but give me a second to Move. Okay. All right, so Jennifer was just getting ready to talk about the two different budget types because on the previous screen, she showed the maximum cost per MSY that you can request. So we're going to go through those briefly, and especially noticing that in the chat, you all represent both of these budget types. The first budget type and the most common is cost reimbursement. And through the cost reimbursement budget, the funds are utilized to pay for program costs. Well, actually, the funds for both of these budget types are used to pay for program costs such as member support, operational costs, and administrative costs. This budget type is available to programs whose design includes a mix of different types of members. A cost reimbursement budget requires a full and detailed budget that outlines both the CNCS and grantee funds. Through the grantee funds, programs must meet the AmeriCorps requirements for providing financial match, which we're just going to discuss later in this webinar. And the budget type also allows the flexibility to use all of the funds for allowable costs, regardless of whether your program recruits and retains all of your AmeriCorps members. This is the most common budget type, and that last piece I just said is where a big part of the difference is between the fixed and cost reimbursement. The second budget type is the full cost fixed amount. These funds are paid out based solely on AmeriCorps member enrollment and retention. This budget type differs from a cost reimbursement budget in the fact that it's not managed or reported by line item budgets that we're going to be talking about in this session. Just like cost reimbursement budget, this budget type is available to programs with a mix of full-time and less than full-time members. And while there are not specific matching requirements, the maximum awarded amount per member is it's not less than, it's the same. So you still have to raise the funds needed to administer the program. And you still have to operate on all the different line items that are in a cost reimbursement budget, but you're not allocating those line by line in the budgets you submit. It's just assumed that you're going to be using those costs for the different areas. And then the last main budget type, which I'm not sure we had any that are on this call, but it's the Education Award Program, in case anyone's listening to this call and represents that later. These funds are paid based on AmeriCorps member enrollment. The Education Award Program budget provides a small fixed amount of funding to programs, and the program design can include a mix of full-time and less than full-time members. It's similar to the full-time fixed amount budget in the fact that it's not managed or reported by line items. There's no matching requirement, but programs against selecting an education award program budget are responsible for utilizing their own or other non-AmeriCorps resources for the majority of those member and program costs. This budget type, like the fixed amount, has reduced financial tracking responsibilities, but you should still adhere to the same good financial requirements and responsibilities. So I want to see if there are any questions first before we go into the details of the AmeriCorps budget. Chat? No? Okay. So we're going to be talking about the cost reimbursement that must be submitted by line item expenses. Even if those of you on the call are doing fixed cost budgets, this is still really important for you all to understand because these are all items that you need to either allocate in your own organization budget when managing your AmeriCorps program. So all of these things still apply to you, but you're not doing them in a line item format when you submit your grant. So the cost reimbursement budget is completed as a part of your grant application, just like the other elements we talked about in the previous session. And it's comprised of 4 main sections: the program operating cost, member cost, administrative indirect costs, and source of match funds. So we're going to go through all of these and talk about the sub areas in each. Okay, the first section, program operating costs, which is is broken up into 9 subsections. These are subsections A through I, and the application instructions clearly outline what can be included in each of these sections, but we're going to go through all of them now. The first subsection, subsection A, is personnel expenses. As you develop this section of the budget, there are some important things you need to know. This subsection only includes staff that are directly charged to the grant and can be organization staff and/or host site staff. Each staff person has to be listed separately, and you need to include their salary and percentage of effort as percentage of the full-time equivalent devoted to the AmeriCorps program. Also, each individual listed in this section is required to complete a timesheet allocating out the actual time spent on AmeriCorps duties and any other projects assigned to them as defined by your organization type requirements in the Code of Federal Regulations, and that's a real important factor. All personnel in this section are also required to have the elements of the National Service Criminal History Check conducted. Serve Washington specifically has determined that the appropriate number of dedicated staff for an AmeriCorps program is between 0.5 and 1.5 FTE for every 10 MSY. And in addition to usage percentages, you need to include the FTE on the grant for each position in the budget narrative and stay within this range. At least one full-time staff member should be utilized on the grant at no less than 50% usage, and any staff member at 50% usage or more should be in the state of Washington, location geography-wise. No staff members should be listed below 20% usage. That's a lot I've just said. So if there are any questions, please just put them in the chat. The second subsection, section B, is personnel fringe benefits. So for each of the staff that you list in the previous subsection, you have the ability to include fringe benefits. Allowable cost and fringe benefits include FICA, workers' compensation, retirement, SUDA, health and life insurance, and IRA and 401k. Holidays, leave, and other vacation benefits are not included in the fringe benefit rates. And I think I'm going to go back for a second. I want to point out that for each of these slides, we're giving you examples of how you could write the different items in these subsections. So when we provide the slides afterwards, I think it'll be really helpful to go back and check what you put in your budget against the examples that we provide here, because these are really good written out examples. I'm going to go back to the fringe benefits. I just wanted to show that. A few things to note: you need to list the types of fringe benefits and cost of the benefits for each staff position, or you can provide a calculation for total benefits as a percentage of the salaries to which they apply. So you'll see the two different examples there on the bottom. If a fringe benefit amount is greater than 30%, then they must be listed separately and justified. The third subsection, section C, is both staff and member travel. So in this staff travel section, you need to consider staff mileage to visit member sites, maybe staff conference travel, member mileage for special events, long distance travel for member training, member conference travel, etc. For all the travel that you put in this section, you need to describe the purpose of the travel along with a calculation that includes itemized costs for any of that travel, like airfare, transportation, lodging, per diem, and other travel-related expenses. For mileage and per diem, you need to utilize the current General Services Administration reimbursement rate unless your organization's policy is different than these costs. And that should be treated consistently under your organization's policy. It's really important to note that there are a couple of things that are required and optional. So for staff travel, it's required that you include 2 days of a subgrantee meeting in the Olympia area, and also the America Service Commission National Service Training Conference. It says a 5-day out-of-state conference. So primary AmeriCorps program director is required. Fiscal position is highly encouraged. And then optional is the national, it's not listed here, I don't think, but the National Conference of Volunteering and Service. I'm sorry. Thought I heard someone
No,
chime
that's
in.
right. You're right.
Okay. Optional is the National Conference of Volunteering and Service. Information can be found on the Points of Light website. In the member travel section, you need to consider member mileage for special events. And like we just said before, long distance travel for member training, member conference travel. For all travel that you put in this section, you need to describe just like with the staff section, the purpose of the travel, along with a calculation that includes those itemized cost. Same thing, requirements for the mileage and per diem. An optional cost that you should consider is leader corps travel for 4-day member training opportunity, 2 days virtual and 2 days in the Lacey area. AmeriCorps, this is for AmeriCorps members only, and programs usually send either 1 to 2 nominated members. And again, here's an example on the bottom on how you can write out those costs. And then the 4 subsections, subsection D is equipment. Equipment is defined as tangible, non-expendable personal property that has a useful life of more than 1 year, and it costs at least $10,000 per unit. Equipment purchases are limited to 10% of the total CNCS funds requested. Most programs don't have cost in this category, except for Jennifer, is it true that Conservation Corps programs tend to
Yeah.
be the program type that might have this?
Yeah. And if you have any equipment costs, you would need to get those pre-approved by Serve Washington.
And then the 5th subsection, section E, is supplies. So the supplies section includes consumable supplies and materials, including equipment that doesn't fit that previous definition of equipment that we just talked about. It's required that all AmeriCorps programs budget for AmeriCorps service gear with the AmeriCorps logo. This could be branded polos or t-shirts, AmeriCorps lanyards, name tags with the AmeriCorps logo, or describe how you're going to provide members with that service gear without using grant funds. You can go to, the nationalservicegear.org to look for gear, or gooddeed.org. A lot of programs use local vendors now. You might want to check out some folks at the National Service Conference that's coming up in Atlanta to see. I think a few of them are going to be showing some of their gear that you can look at as ideas. And single items that are costing $1,000 or more have to be individually listed. And it's important to know that AmeriCorps members must wear an AmeriCorps logo on a daily basis. So you want to think about how you think about that in terms of what you're going to include in your budget. Okay. The 6th subsection, section F, is contractual and consultant services. These would be any costs related that you use for consultants related to your program's operation, except for training or evaluation consultants, which would be listed under a subsection G or H respectively. I'm going to cough, so I don't want to cough. These could be operational program coaching support to assist in development of forms, systems, or processes if you needed help with that. And you must list a daily rate for anybody you include in this subsection. There's not a maximum daily rate. There used to be a long, long time ago, but not anymore. And again, there's an example. And then Jennifer, you said you wanted to try talking.
Yeah, if you
See if it works,
can
and
move
I
the
can advance your
slides,
side. Sure. We'll
we'll
give it
see
a
if we
whirl.
can. Yeah. All right. So the next subsection, section G, is staff and member training. And staff training items are costs associated with training staff on program requirements and training to enhance the skills staff need for those effective program implementation. It could be like program or financial management training or team building. And then member training costs are costs associated with member training to support them in carrying out their service activities. If you're traveling to a conference, the travel for that conference will go under staff or member travel, whichever one it applies to, but the registration fees for that training or conference would be listed here. Okay. It is required per Serve Washington, as we talked about in staff travel, to attend the American Service Commission National Service Training Conference. And that registration fee is approximately $500 per person. And as in the other slides, there is an example here for you for a member training fee for CPR first aid. Okay. The next section is evaluation. And the costs included here do not include the daily, weekly gathering of data to assess progress towards meeting your performance measures. These are the costs for a larger assessment of program impact, as well as an assessment of the overall systems and program design. So the amount you include will depend upon how long you've had an AmeriCorps program and if you're required to have an internal or external evaluation, for which more guidance is provided in the RFGA and that we talked about on the last webinar also. Okay. The ninth subsection, section I, is other programming costs and can include the following costs. You are required to budget for criminal history, national service criminal history checks for staff and members who receive a salary, education award, living allowance, stipend, or similar payment. So any staff listed in the personnel section of your budget have to also be included here. And Serve Washington said that cost should be at least $68 a person. That's assuming that you're not doing any state of residence checks. Now, if you have longstanding staff that have compliant NSCHCs, you could put a note in this line item stating all staff have compliant NSCHC. Any changes in staff, new staff will undergo an NSCHC and not budget for them. But if you have to include them unless you include information about why you are not budgeting for them. Okay. This section also includes office space rental for programs operating without an approved indirect cost rate that covers office space. I don't typically recommend including office space. The Office of the Inspector General has been latching on more to these pieces. And if you are going to include it, you need to make sure that you're meeting the Code of Federal Regulation requirements. You have to have, can't think of the word, you have to show that the rent is comparable to other rents in the area, right? And then you can also include in this section timesheet software, utilities, telephone, internet, and similar expenses that are specifically used for AmeriCorps members and AmeriCorps program staff and are not part of your organization's direct cost allocation pool.
And Jennifer, you're cutting out again, so I'll take over from
Okay.
the next slide. We're going to go back and forth a little
Sorry,
bit.
I don't know what's going on.
The next section is other program operating costs. If these are include recognition costs for members, gifts and or food and an entertainment event setting are not allowable costs. So this is a tricky line item. We always encourage programs to discuss these costs with your state commission and make sure they're allowable, even though we know that recognition and retention incentives are really important. So those are other program operating costs. So now we're going to talk about the member cost section of your budget, which is broken up into two subsections. This is a big section to understand. Sections A and B, living allowance and member support cost. The first subsection, section A, is living allowance. It's in this subsection that you'll indicate the number of members you're requesting and whether your request is for members with a living allowance or without a living allowance. Jennifer showed the different member service terms earlier. This is the chart that shows the service terms, the minimum number of hours, and the minimum and maximum living allowances for each member type. The only term with a minimum living allowance is a full-time member. The maximum living allowances are shown on the screen. I don't think we have any professional core programs. That programs with a professional core program are not required to adhere to the maximum living allowance amounts. Education award programs are also not required to provide a living allowance, but if a living allowance is provided, you must comply with the maximums outlined in the request, the RGA that Sir Washington puts out. The second subsection, section B, is member support costs. This section includes FICA, workers' compensation, or AD&D, healthcare, and other member support costs. It does not include the education award or the child care benefit, which are directly provided by AmeriCorps. Okay. Federal unemployment compensation law does not require coverage for members because no employer-employee relationship exists. The grantee cannot charge the cost of unemployment insurance taxes for members to the grant unless it's mandated by state law. Programs should budget for workers' compensation or accidental death and dismemberment, like we just talked about. Any questions on any of that so far? The next section is the third section of your budget, administrative indirect cost. Administrative costs are general or centralized expenses of the overall administration that do not include particular program cost. AmeriCorps allows applicants to request federal funding to cover administrative costs up to a fixed percentage rate without a federally approved indirect cost rate and without documentation supporting the allocation. No matter whether the fixed percentage or another indirect cost rate is used, most state commissions, I don't know if Serve Washington retains a portion of that. No. There are 3 different methods to calculate allowable administrative indirect cost, of which your program will select one. It's the 3 options you see on the screen: the CNCS fixed percentage rate method, the federally approved indirect cost rate method, or the de minimis method. And I'm hoping, Jennifer, I'm going to let you walk through these screens and hopefully your audio is good on this.
Sure, I know this is more complicated. So, are you hearing me okay so far?
So far, I'll let you know.
So the first method and the most commonly utilized is the CNCS fixed percentage. And this rate allows you to charge administrative costs up to a cap without a federally approved indirect cost rate and without documentation supporting the allocation. So the maximum that you can ask for on the CNCS or federal side is 5%. And then the maximum on the grantee side is 10%. And those formula, this is the section of the budget that people struggle with the most. So I put all the formulas in there for you to show you how it should be. Now, when you actually put this line item in eGrants, you would replace those formulas with the actual numbers so that they can see your calculation and how you came to your totals. Okay, so for this example, CNCS shares CNCS section 1 total plus CNCS section 2 total times 0.0526. Now we say it's 5%, but because it's also including that third section, we have to kind of back into it. So we multiply it by times 0.0526. And then the grantee share is the section 1 total. So both CNCS and grantee, the whole section 1 total plus the whole section 2 total times 0.1. Those are both maximums. You can certainly ask for less than that, but this is a good way to meet your match percentages also. Okay. Thank you, Amy. The second one is a federally approved indirect cost rate. If your agency, your fiscal agency, has a federally approved indirect cost rate, you have to use it. No ifs, ands, or buts, okay? So this rate will constitute documentation of your administrative costs. Again, you cannot exceed that 5% on the CNCS share, and then you'll ask for whatever the unrecovered part is on the grantee share. So again, I've put the formulas in there. The CNCS share is calculated the same as the CNCS fixed percentage, okay? The grantee share is calculated differently because you have a different rate. So you're going to take section 1 total plus section 2 total times your federally approved indirect cost rate. Now, if your federally approved indirect cost rate is 30% and your agency allows it, you could lower that to 15%, okay? You want to make sure you're not overmatching. So if you have the ability to lower that, especially like universities, they have really high indirect cost rate. So you're going to multiply by that federally approved indirect cost rate that you're claiming, and then you're going to subtract the CNCS share of those indirect costs total. Okay, these formulas again are listed here for you to help you. And then the last option we have is the de minimis method. And this is for organizations that have never at any point in time had a federally negotiated indirect cost rate and who receive less than 35 million in direct federal funding. Okay, you can indefinitely use a de minimis rate of 15% of modified total direct cost. If you use a de minimis rate on any federal grant, you have to use it on all federal grants. Okay, so that's really important to understand. This is calculated essentially now with a rule change that took place last year, the same as the CNCS fixed percentage. So if you're not using the de minimis rate on any other grant, then I wouldn't elect for that. I would go for the CNCS fixed percentage rate, which gives you flexibility on other grants potentially. And again, the calculation piece is listed there for you. Okay. The fourth and final section of the budget is the source of match funds. All programs have to complete a source of match funds. If you are a fixed cost grant, you have to complete your source of match funds too, not just cost reimbursement. And the amount as entered has to equal the budgeted total. So if your cost reimbursement, your grantee share total of your budget needs to exactly match dollar for dollar the total of your source of match funds chart. Okay. You have to include the match description, the match amount, the designation if it's proposed or secured, the type of match, whether it's cash or in kind, and the source, whether it's private, state, local, or federal. It's important the description, you shouldn't just say personnel salaries. They know where you're putting the match. It's already outlined in your budget. You should say, where are those dollars coming from? Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. Okay, and you don't even need to say what it's for in your budget. You can just say Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, match is secured, it's cash, and it's for $30,000 and it's private. Okay, but you do have to do that for both fixed cost grantees and cost reimbursement grantees. Okay. The match percentages have changed with the rulemaking that took place last year. So the maximum match now is 30%, whereas previously it was 50%. And the match doesn't increase each year, it goes up every 3 years. So if you're a brand new program, in your first 3 years, it's 24%. If you're in years 7, 8, and 9, it's 28%. Okay. Higher match percentage, like if your match percentage is 28, required match percentage 28, and you put 50% match, that does not make you more competitive. It doesn't give you any extra points. It actually can hurt you because you're held to that match percentage. So you can't spend your federal dollars if you can't meet your match requirement. So you want to get your match down as close as possible to the required amount, right? And there's a couple ways you can think about doing that. If you look here, the match percentage is, you take your total of your CNCS share funds and your grantee share funds. That's how it's calculated, right? If we scroll, go to the next slide, there's an example here. The maximum cost per MSY we've talked about a lot. For this coming year is 25,200. So let's say you request 5 MSYs. We know that's below the minimum for 10 that Serve Washington has, but this is just an example. 5 MSYs times $25,200 equals 126,000. So that's the total amount of federal dollars that you can request. It's important to understand that your maximum cost per MSY is not related to your AmeriCorps living allowance. They are two separate things. You could request none of your living allowance on the CNCS side and put it all on the grantee share, and maybe all your other expenses are on the CNCS side. All right. So those two numbers are not tied together. This just helps you figure out what is your maximum amount of dollars that you can ask for on the federal side of your grant. As I said, you don't want to overmatch, right? But you are required to meet a certain match percentage. So to help with that, what AmeriCorps has talked about more and more in the last couple of years are $0 line items. This goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, a program budget versus your grant budget. If you put everything from your program budget in there, your match percentage could be really high. So we want to show that you're still doing those things, but we want to have it as a dollar amount tied to your match, okay? So you can do what's called a $0 line item. If you'll notice here, you still have the purpose and the calculation filled out. So this is staff webinars and local training sessions. So it's 5 staff times 2 trainings, topics to include program management, volunteer management, and program specific skills, times $100 per training for registration equals $1,000. And that last line there, it says costs covered by outside funding sources. So you don't have to report on these expenses to Serve Washington because there are not actually any costs allocated to the budget because the CNCS share is 0 and the grantee share is 0, but it shows that you are providing this staff training for your staff members. That's a new concept, I know, for a lot of people. So I just want to pause and see if there's any questions on that.
I do have a question. Does that mean it counts in the match section? Are you going to be looking to cross-reference that if that's in the match, it's also here?
No, you're going to have 0 for grantee share and 0 for CNCS. So there's no dollars allocated to our match for this line item.
Okay.
Does that make
so
sense, Erica?
But they also could be if we wanted to.
So I mean, technically, yes. If you wanted to include this as match, you could. But what I'm saying is, like, let's say your match is already at 50% and you want to lower it. So I'm going to make some of those line items $0 line items,
Okay.
like this here.
That makes sense.
Anna's asking, is it better include that information than leave it off? I think it is better because it's showing that you're putting these items in, especially with the pieces that they're asking for nowadays. They're asking at the national level, at least, well, and at the Serve Washington level for specific costs in relation to recruitment, retention, data collection. Okay. In eGrants, there is a line item in the funding demographic section that says additional revenue. This is above and beyond your match. So let's say your match is $50,000, right? Your grantee share is $50,000, but you have $0 line items totaling $20,000 in your budget. You would put that $20,000 in the funding demographic line of eGrants. You're not held to that amount. They don't ask for documentation. It just says, hey, we're so great and so invested in this program. We're adding extra money beyond what we're claiming as match in our budget. Okay, so it shows where those dollars go. Other questions on this? Great questions,
Yeah,
yeah.
quick question. So could you do that in the grantee share for, say, staff costs to keep your match low?
Yeah, you can
Could
have
you say-
$0 staff.
And
So
still
you could
say like staff at 90%, corporation for national service covers 50%, our costs covered by outside funding sources and not reported as matched just to keep our number low?
You could. What I would
Weird.
do then is I would make sure your timesheet, it's a little bit more difficult with staff if you're doing a portion of, if you're saying they're 90%, but you're only charging 50% of them to the grant. So I would charge that all up, use those CNCS dollars probably before those match dollars. Does that make sense?
Right. So the timesheets would still show 90% of time spent on the grant.
Right, but you might charge that 90% of time fully to the CNCS share until the CNCS share is exhausted.
Is gone. Oh, right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you have let's say you only have someone at 25% on the grant, you could put them fully as a $0 line item, have no CNCS or grantee share. And if you have a staff member that's a $0 line item, you do not have to do an NSCHC check on them because there's no salary tied to them in relation to the CNCS share or the grantee share of the budget. Okay.
Thanks.
Like Tetris, putting all the pieces together. Okay. Any other questions? These are great questions. All right. The next slide just kind of shows you how you can kind of back into what you need to calculate or how much you need at a minimum for your match. So again, we're going to use the same numbers we used earlier, 5 MSYs. So we know that the maximum we can ask for on the federal side is $126,000. And we're going to back into that required match. So we're going to take that $126,000, we're a brand new program. So we know our match is 24%. So we're going to take that $126,000 divided by 0.76 to get our total budget. CNCS and grantee share together, which would be $165,789. Then we're going to take that total grant budget minus the federal amount that we can request, which is going to give us our grantee share. So this program needs a minimum of $39,789 for their match. Okay. All right. So there's lots of different things you can utilize for match. You can use 2 different kinds of match, cash or in-kind. For cash match, that could be contributions received by cash or check or electronic funds transfer or payroll deductions. They can be secured from donations or foundations, excuse me, or grants or corporate contributions, lots of different areas. You may use other federal funds as match on your AmeriCorps grant, but you must have approval from that other federal agency to do so. So you must have in writing from that other federal agency that you can use it as match on your AmeriCorps grant. And you cannot use AmeriCorps funds as match on any other federal grant. All right. In-kind resources are defined as non-cash contributions. So it could be equipment, supplies, training time, right? To be allowed, the in-kind resource has to be directly benefiting and be specifically identifiable to the program or project. With the lower match requirement, with the match capping out now at 30%, I am encouraging, and Sir Washington's encouraging programs to move away from in-kind match. It just is questioned more in audits. It's harder to document. So just looking at your current match and seeing like, this is in-kind, like that could be, like we said earlier, like rent. Maybe someone's donating the rent building for you. That's just harder to document. So moving away from those pieces, if you can, just kind of safeguards your program a little bit more, right? You treat anything on the CNCS side and the grantee share the same in terms of documentation, allowability, and up to amount. So no matter what side of the budget it's on, it's treated exactly the same. Right. All right. So because all of you can be coming from different places in your understanding of the AmeriCorps budget, we're just going to talk about a few other things in relation to the cost reimbursement grant. In terms of the cost reimbursement grant, it is a reimbursement grant. So after you incur the cost, you're going to submit an expense report to your state commission. Your state commissions vary on how frequently these reports can be submitted. And Sir Washington can provide that guidance for you if you need it. And then you're going to be reimbursed. You must always have documentation for any of the expenses that you have to support all your costs, except for that indirect cost section. That does not have to have documentation to support those costs. All right. And then I kind of want to wrap up with program income. This is something that we're seeing programs not have a clear understanding on, and it's really, really important that you do. Program income is income including fees for service earned as a direct result of your grant-funded program activities during the grant period. The income has to be retained by you as a program and be used to finance your program's grantee share during that specific grant year. So here's some examples, and this is not an end-all be-all list. It's income from fees charged to register participants for a workshop or conference that your AmeriCorps program sponsoring, income from the sale of commodities, data and information records, service, or items fabricated or produced under your program, such as books, publications, t-shirts, whatever that is. Revenue received in return for providing AmeriCorps member services to a third-party entity. This is where most programs have program income. So this is like you place your members in a school district and that you charge them a host site fee. That is program income. You have a fee for service set up for your environmental program with the state parks department. That is program income. It is directly from the AmeriCorps member service activities income that you have received, right? And then the last example is rental or usage fees charged for use of equipment or supplies purchased with grant funds. So it's really important that you understand where you have program income, if you have it, and then ensuring that you are utilizing it fully in that grant year. All right, the other piece you have to understand is programs cannot enter into a contract for or accept fees for service performed by members when the service benefits a for-profit entity, when it falls within a prohibited activity, or when it violates the non-duplication and non-displacement provisions of AmeriCorps. Okay, so we just want to pause here for questions again. Questions related to anything here? One of the things that I will, well, I'll talk about that in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. So just to kind of wrap up, just a few final notes here. I will be providing some resources to you all. One of those resources, it's an older resource. It's from 2012, but there hasn't been any newer resource. And Amy, I'm going to try this and see if I can share my screen for a second. We'll see how this goes. We only have a few more slides, so hopefully it won't act up. 1 second now. Okay. So this is I'll share this with you all with the slides. It's a program income FAQ. So it is from 2012, but all of this should still be relevant in terms of program income. Okay. The second resource I'm going to share with you, excuse me, is a budget worksheet. And on column K, it lists any required Serve Washington pieces for that section. So for the personnel section, it says what the Serve Washington requirements are. For staff travel, it has those listed. It automatically calculates at the bottom your match percentages and your cost per MSY for you. The indirect cost calculations are in there if you are a CNCS fixed percentage. If not, you'll just remove these formulas so it doesn't double count. And it also has the source of match funds. So this mirrors exactly eGrants, so you can literally copy and paste it into eGrants when you're done. So those are two resources that I'll be sharing with you. Okay. We'll go back to the PowerPoint.
Jennifer, there was a question from Richard in the chat. Any suggestions if he can't get his grantee share down to 24% and stay within the MSY cost per year? Or cost per MSY?
So you're first going to want to max out your cost per MSY. And I always tell programs there's not necessarily a benefit to, like, if the cost per MSY maximum is 25,200, max it out. We always say that AmeriCorps is a program of people versus money. So you want to be able to use all the money that AmeriCorps is allowing you to utilize, if of course it makes sense for your program. But most programs need that maximum cost per MSY. I think from there, it's looking at, once you maximize your cost from a SWI and shifting whatever you need to over to the grantee side, it would be making some of your line items $0 line items if you can. Like, you can't make living allowance a $0 line item on the grantee share. You have to show that you're paying that. There, and Diane, tell me if I'm stepping out of turn. We do have some opportunity and we've worked with a few of you all that are on this call to assist with looking at some of the grant elements. So if you wanted to do that, you could also reach out to us, and maybe Amy, you can put our contact information in the chat. So, you know, it might be a quick look at your budget to see, like, hey, have you thought about this or that?
Yes, I totally support still allowing those one-on-one sessions as well.
Great. And that doesn't have to be necessarily just on the budget. It could be a different grant element or multiple grant elements. Okay. Amy, can you throw the PowerPoint back up when you have a sec? I think it's safer probably on your screen. All right. And then just to kind of wrap up here. So just a couple of reminders. You have the AmeriCorps Technical Assistant webinars from their funding opportunities page. You have the Serve Washington Technical Assistant webinars that are available on their page. And then you have our On3Learn courses, which are free to you all and your stakeholders or anyone else in your organization. We have 5 different applicant courses. Those are geared towards the AmeriCorps competitive application. So Serve Washington will have a few different variances to them, but it gives you a good foundation. And then we have 2 staff courses on understanding the AmeriCorps budget. Part 1's on compliance and technical components, and part 2's on the budget type and financial reporting. This, as we said, is our last of our 4-part webinar series. These have all been recorded and they are available for you. Serve Washington does have those recordings available for you if you've missed any of them. Okay. And then I'll stay on for a few minutes in case there's any other questions. Otherwise, we've really enjoyed interacting with you all throughout these 4 sessions. Amy and I will both be at the Ask National Service Training Conference at the On3Learn booth if we're not presenting. So please come say hi to us. We'd love to meet you in person. Any other questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry. I feel like years ago, there might have been some rule about not adjusting the amount of money you budgeted into admin. So this whole 0 cost line item is new to me. So is there any reason why, if you're struggling to meet the match, you would want to include the full 10% or 15% de minimis in the matching column versus putting 0 in there to keep your proposed match low? And could you adjust that later?
So I always help programs to max out your indirect costs first. Because
Right,
if
in
you
the
can.
budget line. Okay, right,
In
in
the
the
budget line.
CNCS side. Right,
And the
okay. I'm talking
grantee
about like the
share.
match and the grantee
Because
share.
if you look at, if you're a brand new program, you have 24% that you have to match. 10% of that automatically can be indirect costs. So you only have to come up then with 14%. The $0 line items would most likely not be an indirect. It would be in a direct cost line item.
What if you could meet those, because with minimum wage being what it is in Washington State, we have to pay our members more, right, to be competitive, I think, compared to a lot of other states. So if we're already
Meeting your match.
investing a lot into Section B, into member support costs, and our CPA is really concerned about keeping our match as low as possible.
Yeah.
could I throw at him the option of what's the advantage of including any match in the admin line? Or would we be able to adjust that later if some of our members left? Like, are there special rules about that admin line? I feel like 20 years ago that there might have been, or no? Or is
I
that
will
just a
put the
normal budget line? Okay.
I will put the caveat, I'm not an accountant. I've worked many years for the AmeriCorps budget. I have not seen any rule as such. It would be a normal budget amendment. And we do have some programs that put $0 on the grantee share of the indirect costs because they are already meeting their match, especially like it usually happens with newer programs that have a lot more startup costs. But it depends, like if you're trying to meet a higher living allowance, anytime you go above the minimum living allowance, your match is going to go up
Yeah.
because you have to include the living allowance on yours. So you could zero out the grantee share of the admin cost or claim, like instead of 10%, you could claim 0.05% just to have something there. Budget amendments are usually a bit easier if you already have at least like $1 or $2 in that section. It's easier for the state commission to do those budget amendments that way versus having to go higher up to a portfolio manager sometimes if you haven't included any money in that section, like for example, contractors. Does that make sense?
That's awesome. Yes. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Other questions? All right. Well, I want to thank you all again. We really appreciate you all being here and good luck with your applications. And again, stop by and say hi to us in Atlanta. We'd love to see you.